प्रसार भारती अभिलेखागार की प्रस्तुति सदाबहार सुनहरे दौर का अनमोल खजाना।
Hello. Do we find it strange to refer to the various arts like music and cinema as an industry, just like the way we refer to things like steel, textiles, and milk food as an industry? What does it imply when we call filmmaking as an industry? Firstly, any industry which manufactures an end product, it makes it for sale, and it is called a commodity. Now, when we watch a film, do we see it like a commodity, or do we relate to it with a lot of awe and wonder? Film lovers will of course say that they relate to cinema with awe and wonder. But in this episode, we are going to take the case of those who say yes, cinema is a commodity. But why? You see, till the 40s, cinema was always seen as a great social ritual. People came to the theatres to see the most enjoyable entertainment form. There was very little audience segmentation. But things had to change. And the commodity line begins here. Just like the way radio changed the face of cinema soon after the First World War, a little jukebox arrived later, where you press it and up came the visual with a sound. And that was called the television. The television was going to change the face of cinema soon after the Second World War. One of the first things that TV did, apart from sending all their audiences back home, was to make the viewer conscious of a visual order and arrangement. TV watching makes you aware of cuts, sound mixing, and finally the fact that there are 4 corners to the little image on the screen, which we usually forget to notice while watching a film on the big screen. Soon after its introduction, TV sales jumped from nothing to almost 1 per household in the USA by the early 50s. And due to falling audience in the cinema houses, ticket prices had to shoot up by almost 500%, from 40 cents to $2 per head. The ticketed commodity, called the viewing experience, if you may call it so, had to prove that it was worth paying 5 times more to come to the theatre, plus also incur additional expenses like refreshment and transport, etc., etc. The cinema had to come up with something very unique. And all that the big screen could think of at that time was to become bigger. And Victor Fleming's Gone with the Wind becomes the most important starting point. Firstly, they paid the biggest price for any book at that time, at $50,000. Second, they spent the biggest ever budget at $4,250,000. Third, for its period, it had assembled the biggest number of extras, crews, and technicians. And fourth, it is till date the film which has raked in the maximum, the biggest at the box office, running for over 5 years all over the world. The final figures are known. It ran throughout the Second World War all over the world. And even as recent as 1978, the TV rights for this film alone was sold for $20 million. Now, that's what one calls the essential spectacular cinema. Everything that this film did was larger than life. And as a critic once said, this film was the Sistine Chapel of all movies. Undoubtedly, this film set the benchmark for all future films to come. And we can see this in another example from a film called The 10 Commandments, made in 1956.
In this you shall know that the Lord is God.
Made in the thick of TV mania, this film had to do its best to get the viewers into the cinema hall. And it was not enough just to make a big film. The subject and the treatment also had to demand the largesse. Firstly, these films had to be in color. 2, they had to be in CinemaScope or 70mm. And 3, they had to have big stars. And finally, the story needed to structure the conventional drama between the good and bad forces also as larger than normal. So, the bad man had to be Yul Brynner and the good man as Moses in Charlton Heston.
You gave me this staff to rule over scorpions and serpents, but God made it a rod to rule over kings. Fear not! Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The pillar of fire!
The crowds had to be really large, and the events on the screen constantly applied with special effects and other gimmicky twists and turns.
Behold his mighty hand!
The parting of the Red Sea had to be as miraculous as it would have been in the old legend. In terms of camera angles, the audience had to be given viewing positions which would be impossible to notice in a typical stadium. The music had to be of a high orchestral quality. The sound effects had to be realistic and the acting very natural and convincing. And this is the first contradiction of a spectacle. It had to be as real as it was artificial and fantastic, as convincing as it was unreal. What a contradiction! And yet, the viewer had to be kept within these opposing tensions if you expected him to come back again and buy another ticket to see the same spectacle. And as if these gimmicks were not enough, producers introduced the 3D cinema, where images were rendered through the aid of spectacles into a 3D image, very poor at that. Then they had Cinerama, a 3-screen image which was shot with 3 cameras. Then they had 70mm Todeo, the IMAX, the Big Vision, the Smellovision, etc., etc. Definitely, all this was a case of overreaction to television. The movie moguls did not realize that while they were making these big blockbusters, the world over was also watching films like Bicycle Thieves and Pather Panchali, films made by artists. The spectacular cinema also now needed an artist to come to its rescue. And in the films of David Lean, we can see that artistic touch within the spectacle cinema. In the spectacular cinema of David Lean, you can see the true competitor to the conventional grammar of television. While watching Dr. Zhivago, you can see that David Lean combines the format of the grand image with a very different, intimate kind of rhythm and pace. David Lean identifies and singles out several minor characters on these large scales and thus manages to particularize these colossal events. Of course, a lot of credit in these kind of films should also go to the production designer and his crew, who go about arranging the setup in an independent, professional manner, while at the same time enriching the vision of the director. While watching this grand marriage scene in The Sound of Music, the question uppermost in the mind of the filmmaker here must have been, how can we show a common incident like a marriage in a way that the viewer could have never visualized it before? And the answer to this comes in the variety of angles that we see here, the huge cast of extras, the exquisite rich costuming, the grand choir with an orchestra, commodification also meant that the medium of television had to work out the rhythm of telling a story within 25 minutes, a time slot which continues until this day. So therefore, the narrative had to be very compact. Lots of emotion, some slapstick, and very little time for detailing. So the spectacular cinema of David Lean or Robert Wise spent a lot of time making the viewers observe the event unfolding in a very leisurely, relaxed pace. And this was indeed a very great contribution to the development of the spectacular cinema. Another spectacular form that did come up briefly was the re-emergence of the musical in the form of films like My Fair Lady and Sound of Music. Although this period was very short-lived, elsewhere the love for songs and dance continued unabated. Back home in India, the spectacular had a slightly different tone. It meant big song numbers, long choreographed fights, and of course, the presence of the great legendary superstar. The spectacular also meant powerful emotional drama, as we see here between Amitabh Bachchan and Shashi Kapoor in Diwar.
₹500 की पुलिस की नौकरी, एक किराए का क्वार्टर, एक ड्यूटी की जीप, 2 जोड़ी खाकी वर्दी। देखो, देखो, ये वही मैं हूं और ये वही तुम हो।
It also, of course, demanded the elaborately choreographed fight sequences, as we see here in Sholay, and if possible, mixed with a dash of some of those spaghetti westerns. And all these films, which did very well at the box office, also managed to introduce a strong contemporary element into its unfolding, like this sequence from Roja, which depicts raids conducted by the Indian Army on terrorists in Kashmir. The late 70s saw the emergence of the VCR revolution. Viewers could now get these big spectacular films onto a small VHS tape and take it home. They need not wait now for the big channels to telecast it. The most significant thing of the VCR was that viewers now became technology friendly. They could now put this into their VCR, rewind it, fast forward it, stop it, still it, do it, anything. And as an extension of this came the movie camera, the video camera, which literally turned every family into a filmmaking unit. Cinema had finally reached its democratic climax. And in response to this technological friendly attitude came 3 techno magicians: Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola. If you look close at a film like E.T., you will notice the strong element of realism that Spielberg injects into this impossible event, at least for the moment. And with the addition of all the technical gizmos, Spielberg updates the visual scenario of the frame space. But where Spielberg scores over all the others is the reversal of the role of the bad guy. In conventional films, all outer space creatures were bad and Earthlings were good people. Here, the E.T. is the main protagonist, and all the Earthlings, except for the kid and his friends, are the sworn enemies of E.T. Trapped within this sentimental conflict, we know there is no way, realistically speaking, for the kids to escape. And at the vital, crucial moment, Spielberg brings the medium of cinema to the kids' rescue. A whole battery of special effect artists who would have labored for years to achieve this complex blue screening with all the precise traveling mats, etc., etc. The magic of cinema continues to reign supreme. If the villains are not available in a futuristic mode, then they can surely be found in the prehistoric era. And in his usual inimitable style, Spielberg reverses the role in the most realistic a manner as possible.
Gallimimus.
The wheeling uniform direction changes just like a flock of birds evading a predator.
They're flocking this way.
In Jurassic Park, greedy present-day man builds this phenomenal park, and there he creates dinosaurs with evil intentions. These giant creatures look deadly, but there is a human villain more deadly than these. The kids in the family become the nucleus for the emotional drama, or would you like to call it emotional trauma? The easiest thing for the spectacular cinema to do is to position conflicts either in the distant past or in the distant future. For here, the audience have no way, no reference point to identify with the events. This multi-Oscar award-winning film called Braveheart and such films fall into this package of spectacles. Staging these huge battles provide for a lot of exciting elements in conflicts. The swords, the horses, the costume, the lancers, and finally, Scotland. Whoever could imagine that this piece of land, which provided the world with the best whiskey, could also give them exciting battles? Technical gizmos seem to have virtually no limits.
What the hell was wrong with that take? Nothing with you, baby Herman. You were great. You were perfect. You were better than...
In this film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we are witnessing the perfect combination of technology and photographic realism. Two distinct sets of images are processed, based of course on a common storyboard, and these two images are sandwiched to create the effect of a virtual reality. The cartoon of Roger Rabbit seems to look so lifelike, with all the details like shadows and sound effects, that after a while you give up seeing the two as separate and merge them into one realistic whole. Cinema has indeed traveled a long way, and after that rude jolt from the small screen, it seems to have accelerated so fast that sometimes when you watch films today, it already looks very aged and old already. But looking at it optimistically, one can say that the small screen, which came almost as a threat, almost destroyed cinema for a brief while, finally reconciled and amalgamated with the big screen thanks to the help of the computer. The magic of the big screen seems boundless, for the magicians have grown in large numbers. They are not restricted to animation tables or the studio special effect departments. There are virtually hundreds of them working away to create each of those effects. With all these collaborators, do we see the death of the consummate artist, the death of the individualistic grand author, or do we see in this the cradle for a new unknown form of entertainment in the future? We will discuss and decide on this in the next episode of Frame to Frame. Till then, goodbye.